Welcome to this webinar. I want to say a few words to introduce Isabel Clarke. Her work spans two areas: psychosis and spirituality, and clinical psychology. And both draw on the research-based interacting cognitive subsystems model of cognition, and both seek to bring spirituality into center stage, founding it in cognitive and other research and theory, and regarding it as a central part of what it means to be human. I think one thing amazing about Isabel is that she's able to bridge between the demands of something like working in an inpatient ward, which she's done, and the challenge of grappling with some of the deepest questions of our existence that come up when we try to understand how spiritual issues intersect with madness. So I think she's both practical and philosophical, and she really does have a way of getting to what she calls the simple heart of complex issues. She's the author of a number of books you can check out by going to her website, isabelclarke.org. So maybe without further ado, Isabel, I'll let you get started.
Thank you very much, Ron. Yes, I was going to start by saying a little bit about myself, where I am coming from, which is that I only trained as a clinical psychologist in my mid-40s. Previously, I'd studied history, specialized in medieval history, but I chose to change career because of my experience of the breakdown of a friend. This was when we were in our 20s, and she spent 6 months in hospital, and I was supporting her, and I was horrified. I was horrified by the way that she was treated, and I was horrified by the rationale, if you can call it that, for the treatment, i.e., you've got this diagnosis, so we give you these pills and then some more pills, and then when they don't work, we give you lots of ECT, full stop. No interest whatsoever in very significant things that had happened to her, which seemed to me obviously were rather behind the change in her. So I was on a mission. I felt this was an area that was not understood and where something different needed to be done. So that was when I was in my early 20s, so it was a long road. Took a psychology degree while I was bringing up my children, did lots of voluntary work where I was really standing alongside what I call experiencers, the people who've been through it. And then finally scrabbled my way onto a course and became a clinical psychologist. So studying psychology, piecing together what is going on here with breakdown, and also looking at another question that I thought psychology could shed light on, which was my interest, my sense that spirituality was absolutely vital and central to being human, and spiritual experience was important. I think that was one reason why I went into medieval history, because that was a time when it was taken seriously, whereas among intellectuals in the 1960s, when I was growing up, it was not a fashionable position. And so asking psychology what it could tell me about that. And the aha moment came there in my first job, which was working in psychiatric rehab, when I worked as a therapist with people who had received the diagnosis of chronic schizophrenia, and they told me their stories. And their stories mirrored what I had read in the spiritual literature. And I thought, aha, there's something important going on here. And it was from there that I started to investigate the things that I've written about. So I've pulled together recently the ideas, both the practical ideas of how to work, because I have worked 10 years in acute. I'm now working in primary care, before that in outpatients and psychiatric rehab, finding ways to use the theoretical insights that I got in very practical ways of working. It's all here in the book, which, like Ron says, is, well, not very good at putting things on the screen. The book should be called Comprehend, Cope and Connect, but publishers have other ideas. hence the funny title. Forgetting to keep this going. And so what I'm going to do now is to try and run through both the ideas with particular emphasis on psychosis and the ways of working in an hour, allow plenty of time for you to interact. So fasten your seatbelts, everybody. So first slide. Oh, how do I move the slides? First problem. How do I move the slides?
Slides. The lower left-hand corner.
Oh, that's it. Arrows. Yes, I've forgotten. Yes. Yes, that's right. So, comprehend, cope, and connect. That's what I'm calling it now, because that sums it up. So it gets away from labels and stigmas because it starts from felt sense. And that is the important question of, if everybody listening just thinks, what does it feel like to be me now? Hopefully reasonably calm. Could be some underlying worries there, hopefully slightly excited. That's where it all starts, from that question now. It meets people where they are in their distress, because people who come to see a service like the ones that I've always worked in are not feeling good where they are now, and this is important. And they need to manage feeling bad all the time, because that's usually the situation, somehow. And they've got understandable ways of managing it, like self-harm, attempting suicide, withdrawing from life, head under the duvet, or, for the people who have access to this, tripping off into another dimension, which is how I see psychosis, and I'll talk more about that. And offering different ways to manage that distress, to manage feelings, to work with feelings, to use feelings positively. That's an important part of it. And at bottom, this is about healing the relationship between a person and themselves, because when they're in the sort of situation earlier on in the slide, they are usually treating themselves extraordinarily badly. And that has got to change if they are going to develop their potential and move forward in life to be who they might be. And that is what I think therapy is about. So, just position where I'm coming from in the whole sort of theoretical field. I badge myself as a CBT therapist. This is the way to be able to work in the NHS, certainly, and there's lots about CBT that I'm absolutely wedded to. But I'm a third wave therapist. Hopefully this is familiar to people. It's a term that was coined by the ACT people, acceptance and commitment therapy. All started with Kabat-Zinn and you applying mindfulness to stress and pain in the States, picked up by mindfulness-based cognitive therapy. Marshall Linehan and dialectical behavior therapy, applying it for, in the first instance, suicidal women. Dialectical behavior therapy is a major influence on the way in which I work. Paul Twadwick has evaluated, used mindfulness with voices, so brought it into psychosis. Acceptance and commitment therapy adds in a lot about values, and Gilbert's compassion-focused therapy, that healing of the self-self relationship. All important influences brought together, but under with a different theoretical foundation. That's what Comprehend, Cope and Connect is. So that theoretical foundation, the role of trauma, understanding the role of trauma in the felt sense in the moment being unbearable, that is at the heart of it. People wonder why it is that they have completely fallen apart when something has happened, like they've lost somebody important or something, where other people kind of take it and move on. And usually it's the past being present in the present that, oh, sorry, oh, it's starting to respond. Sorry. This webinar is behaving irrationally. I can't cope with that. Anyway, the idea, I'm using the dialectical behavior therapy diagram here, the idea that we have two separate circuits in the brain, the emotion mind and the reasonable mind, that when these are working together, they are exchanging information between them. They have separate memory systems. That comes, I'll say more about that in a minute, that comes from ICS. And so that when at high or at low arousal, sorry, I need to learn to manage this. Yes, they separate out. The person is the emotional one, is the default one. That's what you get left with. And the emotion mind memory remembers everything in great technicolor detail, but it does not understand time. So the fact that things happened a long time ago, if they're threatening things and the threatening things happening now, as a survival technique, these are all gathered up together. Hence, it is so easy for somebody to find that their internal state in the moment is unbearable. So, this comes down to levels of processing. Let me just try to get this working properly. Right, there's a general recognition that human problems with emotion, and if you don't think human beings have problems with emotion, think about books and plays and soap operas. What would they be like if managing emotions and relationships was absolutely straightforward? They arise because of different types or levels of neural processing. And you've got lots of different theories of that. Start with CBT, Ellis, hot and cold cognition, great terms. You've got, in popular literature, you've got Kahneman, thinking fast and slow. There's McGilchrist, the master and his emissary. Lots of theories within CBT. But the one that I think has real explanatory power is Teasdale and Barnard's interacting cognitive subsystems. And this is a model of cognitive architecture based on experimental evidence of information processing, coding, memory, bottlenecks in processing. When I was doing that psychology degree in the 1980s, I read all this stuff and thought this feels important, but I'm not a detailed person. I couldn't make sense of it. And then, blow me, Teasdale and Barnard come along and make absolutely beautiful sense of it, but they don't manage to communicate it terribly clearly, so it's less generally recognized. So this is my simplified diagram of what they say. There are two central meaning-making systems, networks of connections in the brain. The emotional one they call implicational, the reasonable one they call propositional. They have separate memory systems because putting things in the memory is all part of the process. And the implicational, the emotional one, has direct connections to the senses, to the body, arousal system, everything. The propositional only has connection to the verbal. And if you think about it, there is an evolutionary background to this, that the way that we developed as human beings. And these two work together most of the time when we're in an ordinary state of mind and the world is in its ordinary boring self. These two are talking to each other nicely, but at high or and at low arousal and in certain circumstances, they separate off. And that's when it gets interesting. If you really take this on board, it's quite a challenging model of the mind. Tisha and Barnard say there is no boss, there is no executive function. Our unitary sense of self is an illusion. The mind is simultaneously individual when the two are working together, and when we're in that emotional implicational place, we can step beyond the self. This happens at high and low arousal. There's a constant balancing act between logic and emotion. And one of the questions I wanted to ask when I came into this was, how is it that human beings are so prone to break down? And I think I got the answer there. And when those two systems get desynchronized, as Barnard puts it, you get into a different state of experience. That's when anomalous experiences, voices, etc. are possible, psychosis and mystical experience. And I'll be coming back to that a bit later. And crucially, therapeutically, mindfulness is an incredibly useful technique to manage that balance. So, emotion-driven processing is the one that you're dealing with if you're a therapist. Emotion regulates relationship, both the relationship with others and also that important relationship with yourself. It mobilizes the body for action. The body gets in on the act. And it's that physical immobilization that gives the emotion its punch. That's what makes it difficult to ignore. And where physical arousal is prolonged, it's unpleasant. And that motivates people to avoid emotion. And time, remember, is collapsed in emotion-driven processing. Past threat is added to current threat. So the role of past trauma in psychosis and so-called personality disorder is now being properly recognized. So I hope this feels as if we're trying to draw some things together. So I want you just to think and maybe type in a couple of quick answers. This is an exercise that I take longer over if I'm doing a full workshop. When something's gone horribly wrong for you, I guess, like me, you'll experience a horrible feeling. How do you deal with it? What do you feel like doing about it? And what do you actually do? I have a few thoughts on that one. Because the horrible feeling is at the heart of it. I can see lots of people are typing, looking forward to getting the answers. React quickly to get rid of it. Yes, you don't want it, do you? You want to get away from it. Any others? Crying, yes, crying is what we are given to be able to come to terms with things. Engage with it in felt sense unconditionally. Then coffee, yes, you're a very cool customer. Push it away, distract, yes, get rid of it. Talk to a friend, good idea. Want to push it away, but it's better if I sit with it. Get angry, yes, but try to self-soothe as I curse. Panic, yes, good idea. Distract myself, distract, avoid. I'll stop there because these are, or all of these are very much the things that people do. And there's lots of things that people do in the short term which make absolute sense. I seem to have sort of frozen. Can I do something about the video? Is it frozen?
I think it's just a glitch. Maybe just keep going,
Okay.
and hopefully
Okay,
it'll unfreeze.
I'll ignore that. Anyway, all these things are natural reactions, distracting, trying to get away from it, try and pretend it doesn't happen. Some people, gave responses that they deal with it, they face it straight away and they deal with it. But the distracting, doing something to make it a bit less, like having a drink or something like that. If the feeling's there all the time and you carried on doing that, think what would happen and think what that might say about symptoms of so-called mental illness. So, right, I've forgotten, I went straight onto that. Yes, the idea that if you decide to stick your head under the duvet and not face it and carry on doing that for any length of time, you're going to get diagnosed as depressed, sort of shut yourself down, stop competing. If you keep the anxiety on the boil by ruminating, by turning it over in your head, you'll probably get an anxiety disorder. And if you take drugs or drink or something, it's pretty predictable what's going to happen if you do nothing but. And for the person that can do this, can trip into another dimension, that is very often a handy escape. So that's my model of mental health problems. So let's move on. What I base on this is my sort of paradigm formulation diagram, which certainly, I wouldn't do this straight away with everybody with psychosis, but certainly all the people that don't that I see now. First of all, validate the fact that whatever they're doing that's brought them into the service, they're doing it because it's unbearable being them. There are good reasons in recent things reinforced by past events that land up with that horrible feeling. We then leave that and look at their strengths, everything they're good at, everything they care about. They are a whole person. And I will always ask about their wider faith or spiritual connection. Some people don't recognize they have any, but if they do, we put it down. And then we'll do the bit that you get in your standard, the maintaining cycle you get in your standard CBT formulation. What do they do in order to manage the feeling? It's really helpful in the short term, but keeps them stuck longer term. So everybody calls these spiky diagrams, and I've got loads of people doing them all over the place in different settings. Now, I'll just pause there a moment. Any particular questions, anybody, before I go on to looking at psychosis and indeed psychosis and spirituality? I can see this question here.
Yeah. Isabel, two things. One is if you could try turning your webcam off and then turning it back on, where
Right.
it selects share your webcam, see if you can unfreeze yourself.
Yes.
And then just go ahead and start it again. That might work.
Right. It seems to be a bit blank.
Now I see the image of you again, but it still looks frozen. So maybe you're just froze. I don't know. It's fine. Now, one question that came up: how would you describe the difference between a mystical experience and psychosis?
Okay, I think that the answer to that, the short answer is I wouldn't. But I think where I'm coming from there, hopefully, will become clear as I carry on, because that is fairly central to what I'm talking about. I can expand on it a bit more later. Any other questions about anybody sort of really lost with what I've just tripped through rather rapidly? Or is it okay to go on to the whole mysticism, psychosis, what is psychosis, that sort of thing? Okay.
I thought you were pretty clear. It looks like Looks like Jen's
Okay.
ready to go.
Right. Okay. So to understand using interacting cognitive subsystems, understand what is going on both in spiritual experience, mystical experience, and also sort of the sense of the spiritual, the sense of the sacred, the sense of being in touch with something beyond the self, which you can get in, can come into everyday life, which sort of interleaves with everyday life, which gives it that little bit of a glow, that bit of specialness, maybe is a bit spooky, is a bit eerie. So what is happening there? That we have as human beings two ways of experiencing. When our reasonable mind and emotion mind are working together, we are experiencing a shared reality. We're all in the same place together, and we have ordinary thinking. But when those two separate out, we have the possibility of entering another space, which when I'm working clinically, I'll call unshared reality. But when I'm talking about it theoretically, I use Thalborn and Claridge's term, which is the transliminal, across the threshold. We cross the threshold into another area of experiencing. We have the two different ways of knowing, two ways of being as human beings. Now, where that communication loosens, the propositional and implicational working together, that's the ICS terms for emotional and reasonable mind, gives us a filtered but predictable version of the world. We never have the full picture. At high and at low arousal, the implicational subsystem becomes dominant. The filter is gradually lost. It can be a gradual process. Then, in its extreme form, this gives us a different quality of experience. And I'll talk more about that quality of experience in a moment. And I'll say I like that term, the transliminal, across the threshold. More often, the two are working together, adding something to ordinary experience, where we get that sense of the sacred, the supernatural, also where we separate them out a bit by having a few drinks, that sort of thing. Where that communication loosens, this creates space for creativity, transformation, and danger. There are you lose the boundaries, you lose the safety markers. This slide is to try and give you the picture of the schizotypy, the dimension of openness to unusual experience. The idea that this is a human potential that everybody has got, but for some people it's more easily accessed than for others. And I've put the threshold there. You've got your person on the left-hand side who's got their feet firmly planted on the ground. Then you've got the person probably a bit more like me with their head in the clouds. But then across the threshold, you go into another space and everything is different. And there the experience becomes unshared, unless everybody's been taking the same stuff. So how do you get across that threshold? In small way, in spiritual, etc. moments, but seriously across the threshold. Very often this happens at times of transition. When I read the spiritual literature, the saints very often had had major illnesses or something or other had happened in their lives when they got their mystical experiences. Trauma loosens the boundary, it softens the walls, it makes it easier to access that other experience. times of illness and loss, times of physical privation, lack of food, sleep, isolation, the hostage experiences, mind-altering substances, all apply equally to spiritual practice, the saints, and vulnerability to psychosis. If you think about what you're doing with some spiritual practices, getting up in the middle of the night to pray, not eating terribly much, this sort of thing, hermits cutting themselves off, and the sorts of life that somebody who is heading towards a major hospital breakdown with the psychosis, isolated, not eating properly, etc., etc. So I've applied, I wouldn't always use this straight away, certainly with people with psychosis. For some people it's fine, but not for others. But it's a way of making sense of it. Crossing the threshold as a way of managing when life hits a brick wall. Very often there's that sense that just going on in the same old way just wasn't working. And very often there is childhood trauma and that sort of thing behind that. But the thing is that slipping into that unshared reality through heightened arousal, either threat situations or low arousal situations, feels like an escape, but actually everything is much more likely to get out of control. And this is the diagram which is at the center of the therapeutic program, which is called the What is Real program, that I used to run in the hospital and what's on my website. The idea that it's in that ordinary, alert, concentrated state of arousal in the middle, that you have some sort of control over where you are, over the threshold. You can choose to cross the threshold from there, but you can choose to come back to shared reality. In high situations of high stress, more likely to be catapulted into the unshared reality, and also in situations of low arousal, drifting states, mind sort of disengaged, watching the television but not really watching it, popular activity in psychiatric units, not a good idea. So, taking a therapeutic approach using this model, I'm going to first of all look at that sort of helping people who acquired a diagnosis of psychosis, and then I'll come back to looking at the more spiritual side in a minute. So the idea of, first of all, validate the experience as their experience. It's reality for them. It might be unshared reality, but it is reality. Sit lightly to explanations, all explanations, including medical and CBT ones. Be really interested in where that individual is coming from with it. Model sitting with uncertainty, recognizing mystery. The book that, you can't see anything, can you? I'll just try and get my screen back again. This is really annoying. I'll just stop it and start it again and see if it'll play ball. No, it won't. No. What? No, doesn't make any difference. Okay, Madness, Mystery and the Survival of God is the title of the book that I've written about all this, which is based around people's actual experiences. So another one to recommend that you can find out about from the website. So to get back to the thing, shared and unshared reality are a useful way of talking about all this in when you're working in an inpatient, when you're working with people with psychosis, because you're not invalidating their experience, but it's usually important for them to recognize that not everybody sees it like this, and usually they do. Virtually everybody I've worked with psychosis is aware that everybody else sees it a bit differently. They might think that they're right and everybody else is wrong, but at least that's a way into saying, well, maybe if you say want to get out of the hospital or something, you've got to take that seriously. It's part of your problem. It's not just their problem. So, helping the person to take control of their unshared reality is key. How to close off openness to invasion from both within and without. I'll say more about that. And it's a way of respect. This is very important in Britain. We have a very multicultural society, certainly where I work, way of respecting culturally specific ways of making sense of experience. It's no longer enough just to have the dominant way. So I call the program the What is Real program. It takes it's a group program, or it can be used for individual therapy, and there is a manual on my website that anybody is free to use. Takes their experience seriously and opens the way to motivate them to join the shared world, because don't assume that they want to. Their world might be an awful lot more exciting and gives them a lot better sense of self than your world. They need to accept the challenge of managing the threshold, managing the experiences, simple techniques, arousal management, mindfulness, activity in the present. These are all centrally relevant. Any member, you're a member of staff with virtually no training at all, can help people with that. Also, probably better at it than one with a lot of training. Also managing the relationship with voices, seeing that the voices that are part of the strange experiences are a relationship. There may be bits of them that are cut off, but they could also be from outside. Who's to know? Never underestimate the courage that this takes to face this from that place in the middle of the threshold. Knowing which reality you happen to be in at a given time is a very good place to start. So this is my slide for working out which reality you're in. Shared reality is ordinary. Boring is what the groups in the hospital generally said about it. There are clear limits, access to full memory and learning. Precise meanings are available. There's separation between people, separation between ideas, a clear sense of self. On a good day, emotions are moderated and grounded, and it is governed by a logic of either or. Unshared reality is supernatural, feels amazing, numinous, super real, unbounded. Access to ordinary knowledge is touchy, is suffused with meaning or meaningless. Synchronicities abound. The self can be either lost in the whole or supremely important. Emotions swing between extremes or are absent, and it's governed by a logic of both and. And if you can clinically and therapeutically help people to work out which they're in, they can have an idea and then come along and say to you, but that's unshared reality, isn't it? That's what used to happen to me. But crossing the threshold, that's how the light gets in and the dark. Here I'm quoting Leonard Cohen, to somebody from Canada there, isn't there? Do you know, if you know the song Anthem, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There is a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. The implicational part of the mind is embedded in relationship, in the whole. That's the older part. The newer self-conscious part holds our individuality. Temporary control, I'm going back to ICS here, passing backwards and forwards between the two organizing systems is experienced as normality. When the implicational takes over for any length of time, the person is no longer grounded in their individuality. So that's why the boundaries dissolve, that's why the sense of self can become so fluid or get lost. And that is where also the person can have that wonderful sense of being at one with the universe, of being the divine or in touch with the divine. Boundaries between inner and outer and around the self dissolve. So the person is open to any influences, both positive and negative, both from outside and also unresolved issues within the self. And my model of the human being is given in this diagram. As any therapist knows, the primary caregiver mother-child, caregiver-child relationship is at the heart of our experience. We might have to spend a lifetime sort of rewriting it because it's given an unhelpful script, but that is the script that you start with. And that model of relationship, if you think of it in the terms that I've been talking about, we are actually partly that relationship. But that relationship only exists within rings, web of other relationships, relationships with other people, with other, the people around us, the people close to us, the whole of humanity, the people who are not close to us. Non-human creatures, our relationship with the earth. And not only are these relationships part of us, but the quality of these relationships is part of us. And where these relationships are abusive, and some of the relationships I've talked about, we are locked into societies where they are abusive. This is a source of pain to all of us. But getting an understanding where this is the survival of God bit of the title of that book, that sense of relationship with the ultimate, that which in the wider circle, that which is beyond, that, I think, gives us the most information we're ever going to get of the reality of that relationship. But that other reason, unshared reality, transliminal way of knowing is a valid way of knowing. And feeling is the only way we know anything about relationships. And relationships are, after all, pretty much the most important things in our lives. So, ruling that feeling, intuition, whatever, as a way of knowing out of court, as reductionist science would do, is actually not, I would argue, scientifically valid. So, this gives us a way into a cross-cultural way of looking at things as well, which, as I say, is very important. It's part of it. One of my latest projects is developing a cross-cultural way of doing therapy. Ideas of possession, spirit attachment, presence of ancestors have been recognized in many cultures. I think Jen brought up Crazy Wise at the beginning. There's quite a lot coming out now in the media about shamanism, these sorts of ways of understanding different states of being and that sort of thing. And I would argue that this model embraces all of that because the ancestors are part of us and they can be present in the present as well as in the past because there is no time in the transliminal. And I would not rule out that some voices, that some experiences of relationship come from beings that we do not understand or from psychic contents that are plugged into from beyond the self. I am not claiming to understand fully how that happens, but there is evidence that it does happen. The model provides a scientific basis for reaching beyond what we can precisely know into a place of uncertainty. I think it gives us a possibility of knowing what we can know with certainty and where we need to be a little bit humble. Many frequently reported experiences could be understood by the ability to tap into other psychic contents when in a receptive, desynchronized state. Some of the psychic research, Radon and whatchamacallit, remote viewing, people go into a disengaged, sort of very relaxed state in order to be able to do that. That's just one example. Though this is a place of absolute relationship, real-world relationships need the implicational and propositional working together, which is why people in such states become isolated. Both the saints and the people diagnosed with psychosis. So, psychosis, potential for transformation. I'm now bringing together the two, and I hope by now the questioner who asked, how do we tell the difference? I think the answer is more how it plays out. There is intrinsically, it is about accessing the same potential of being human. Traditions such as psychosynthesis and spiritual emergency, Groff, recognize the transformational potential of the transliminal. They tend to distinguish between psychosis and transformational crises. More and more, this is seen as a false dichotomy. I'm very active in the Spiritual Crisis Network UK, and we make it very clear that we are not going to make that distinction. Any such distinction is beyond human knowing. A very helpful way of framing this is Mike Jackson is one of the many people who've done research in this area. In fact, he's pretty much the first. He talks about a paradigm shifting model. The idea, I think I said about psychosis is the place where you can go to maybe when you come to a brick wall in your present life, if you have that, if you're good at that, if you're a high schizotype. And the idea that people who are stuck can use shifting into that other dimension to draw on other resources, other potentials. But there are some real dangers because where the role of stigma and indeed some things that are done within mental health services can help to trap people in a place in unshared reality. If they are not, I've already stressed the courage and the effort that it takes to manage that threshold in a mindful way. And if you're being given the message that your life is over and you might as well forget about anything you wanted to do, why would you join the shared world? Why would you give up being incredibly important, even if there are some unpleasant bits to the experience along with that? So we've got to be, as mental health practitioners, we've got to be pretty careful what we are doing and the messages we're giving. Evidence, bit of hard science. I've already talked about the schizotypy spectrum. This is a very solid body of evidence, which until fairly recently was pretty much ignored by the therapeutic community. But the message from schizotypy is that, yes, if you're a high schizotype, it's everybody is somewhere on the schizotypy spectrum. If you're a high schizotype, yes, if you're going to have a breakdown, you might well get a psychotic one. But on the other hand, the high schizotypes are the high creatives. They are the spiritual people, the sensitive people. They actually have an awful lot of the most valued characteristics. And it's very important that my What is Real program gets that across to people who've been given a diagnosis of psychosis, because, my goodness, they need to be able to rejig their sense of self. Yes, I've put that there. Research by Mike Jackson, Emmanuel Peters, Caroline Brett, Harriet Maitland, and others show that the way in which an individual makes sense of anomalous experiences makes the difference between whether those experiences result in diagnosable mental health difficulties and whether the crisis is short-lived or persists and recurs. So there's a really, it's called the Need for Care research. Emmanuel Peters works at the Institute of Psychiatry, in very, very distinguished clinical psychologist in London. And there's some very exciting research that is not taken enough notice of there. And it actually tells precisely the same story as the cross-cultural epidemiological story that started up with Richard Warner, Recovery from Schizophrenia, published in 1985, Where Have We Been All This Time?, which shows that people in traditional societies, yes, they get the same incidence of psychosis, but they don't get stuck with it in the same way. So we are not doing something right in our society. Right, I've come to the end, and I've got some my books, of course, and some contact details, and I do recommend my website, and I'm now open to questions and your thoughts and things. I'll try and get that webcam back again, but sorry, I've gone and disappeared. I don't know what's happened.
Yeah, I don't know if it's you know what it is, but I really want to thank you for just a wonderful presentation. Whether or not we could see you move, and it certainly made me think a lot. One question I have while other people are typing theirs, and please do type in questions.
Yeah, please type.
You talked about helping people distinguish whether they're in unshared reality or shared reality. But one really tricky thing I've come up with is some people who believe that actually everyone secretly does share their reality, but they're pretending not to. And so,
yes, yeah.
Do you have any tips?
I've met one like that. Yeah. No, I always say you can't win them all, and I think if people are very stuck in their unshared reality, I mean, I worked in inpatient psychiatric hospital for 10 years, you know, and you do get people who are pretty lost in the transliminal, and you can't actually get a conversation with them. But if you start talking in these terms, they actually starts making sense to people who are in that way. I've sort of managed to get across to people sort of gradually and by persisting and that sort of thing. But yes, there will be some people who say that, yeah.
Okay, great. Well, Kate is asking, are there common recurring themes among psychoses?
Yes. And that's one of the places that I started from. I wanted to know, because my way of working is to empathize with what does it feel like to be that person now. That is the central question I will always ask. So in the case of a psychotic so-called symptom, I will ask, what does it feel like to be reporting this? What's at the bottom of it? And you've got themes, very widely disparate things, like a satellite is beaming images into my head, or my thoughts are being broadcast, or the television is able to read what's going on for me or is saying things about me. All of these can be understood by that breakdown in a sense of boundary between self and other, which happens when you step out of your individuality. Your individuality is founded in that two subsystems, two central subsystems working together. When you desynchronize, when you step away from that, then you start to lose those boundaries and you can step into a place where those sorts of experiences you become open to.
So, a guest is asking, can this perspective be integrated with the acceptance and commitment therapy treatment for psychosis?
Yes, I mean, ACT is one of the third wave sort of approaches that I'm influenced by. The emphasis on values in ACT and the direction in which people are going, I think is really, really good. The idea, anything that practices mindfulness for psychosis is in line, because mindfulness is at the heart. I haven't talked about that, but the What is Real program has got mindfulness, and I guess I'm influenced by Paul Chadwick's approach to that, because he was my boss for a while and I was in the middle of all that research going on around me. The idea of distancing yourself from the experience, and ACT has got very good ways of sort of distancing yourself from how you think about something, not getting tangled up in it. All that really useful. The only place where I disagree with ACT is the bus driver metaphor. I don't have because my bus doesn't have a driver. So I've got an orchestra with a conductor instead. You've got many aspects, many potentials in yourself, and the conductor has to shut up some and bring out others, but they're all sort of around. So that's, like ACT, but, it does. ACT comes from a different theoretical basis. It's, I think, in a way, it picks up, I would say, as a sort of side bit of interacting cognitive subsystems. I see ICS as much more fundamental than these other theories. But I agree that not everybody is going to agree with that.
All right. Another question is, what can be done to increase control of and decrease frequency of voices? What would you have to say about that?
Yeah. First of all, remembering that state of arousal diagram. Both low arousal, not being concentrated in the present, drifting states, and states of high threat, high arousal, will make the voices more accessible. So a concentrated activity in the present, in inpatient units, things like jigsaws and word searches suddenly become state of the art. A long, slow out breaths to bring down arousal, soothing activities, all that sort of thing. So those very simple things are become powerful, I would say.
Right. Well, Patrick is asking if you have any thoughts on how structured religions can become negative, and then says it's worth mentioning that he's worked both with people with psychosis who actually use structured religions successfully but were diagnosed with religiosity. So it says obviously there's varying circumstances.
Yeah. Yes, I think, I mean, it's religions, I guess, are developed really as a way of managing the transliminal, but the transliminal is very difficult to manage. And it's a bit like the young lady from Riga who smiled as she rode on the tiger, and she finished the ride, and the tiger's inside with the smile on the face of the tiger. The transliminal state can take over. A lot of certainly. I mean, I'm a Christian, and I've given talks to Anglicans on who work in the Ministry of Deliverance and that sort of thing. And such people very often have a lot of wisdom about how to manage the threshold, how to manage all this. But some extreme religions will go overboard. And once you lose sight of the threshold, once you start to believe the way that you see things completely out of touch with shared reality, then you get a very dangerous combination of absolute certainty, a sense of absolute mission, with something quite dangerous. And that can happen in psychotic delusions, and it can happen. Oh, that's funny. I thought just a moment. Something's happened. Sorry, my computer got plugged out. I hadn't noticed it. It had lost its connection. It can also happen. I think. Is that one okay?
Yeah.
Am I still?
We still hear you.
Yes.
Which is good.
What?
So you ready for the next one?
Yes.
Okay. Well, this may.
I've just noticed CFT. Shall I answer that one? Do you involve the CFT model in your patients, the compassionate focused therapy? May I answer that?
Sure. Go ahead and go to that one. Sure.
Yeah. It's just because it's pretty central. If the Comprehend, Cope and Connect book has got a complete a manual really of a therapeutic program. It's organized in a mixture of individual formulation and a group program, but healing the self-self relationship is pretty central. It's a pretty central tool for breaking a lot of the vicious circles that people get caught up in. If you think about the spiky diagram, working with helping people to break the circles in the spiky diagram, a lot of what keeps people stuck is giving themselves a hard time, which feels right because they hate themselves, but as a result, things don't work well for them, and so on and so on. So compassionate mind, mindfulness, that sort of thing is one of a number of central tools that I use. That's the answer to that one. Yeah.
An important one. Jen has a comment. She says, I remember returning from my non-ordinary states of consciousness, being careful not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I was thinking about this while reading the middle with the ordinary type mind and choosing to cross over, and shamanism and the potential that risk being lost with treatment in the psych system.
Yeah, yes. I mean, that's it. Managing the threshold, that is key. And I give a message to the people that I work with psychosis, that if you can manage that in a way that you can give the people around you who care about you and who locked you up in the hospital, etc., confidence that all will be well, that you're going to be safe and everyone's going to be safe, then you will earn sort of the freedom to manage the threshold for yourself if you want to be able to access both those places. And the transliminal is highly valued in other contexts in our society. And a lot of people who enter the psychiatric system do not want to ditch their transliminal experiences. The system assumes that the name of the game is to shut the whole lot down, get rid of it. For some people, that's what they want. And that's fine, because I'm interested in helping people get what they want. You know, I haven't got an axe to grind. But if they want to be able to manage their transliminal, learn how to do that, provided they can reassure those around them and they can keep themselves safe, fine, good luck to them.
Yeah. Some of the ambivalence some people have about recovery is that sometimes recovery is seen as just returning to the ordinary state of consciousness.
Yeah.
That's where you just want to stay. So I have actually recently been conceptualizing that there's two kinds of recovery. And one is the recovery where we can recover the ordinary state of mind, but the other recovery is where we can turn back and recover that ability to access the threshold. And that I know I've had to work on both kinds of recovery. I've had to work on recover the ordinary, but then wait, I'm stuck in the ordinary now. I don't want to be there. So how can you recover that doorway? And when you can get both, that's when I really feel recovered.
That is centrally what the What is Real program is about. And it starts off, it was developed for people in hospitals, so it was to help them get out of hospital safely, but with the message that, yes, I mean, the non-ordinary states, they hold the transformative potential. If you got into this state in the first place because the ordinary wasn't working, then you probably need something out of the other. If it all gets shut down, a ton of bricks poured on it, then you're back to square one. You're likely to relapse because you needed that. So in a way, that sort of feeds into the whole shamanistic kind of discourse. Yeah, no, I agree with that.
So Sally says, I'm familiar with open dialogue in Finland, where careful family therapy can open up dialogue into some of the original dynamics of personal trauma. Little use of antipsychotics. And then she asks, have you heard of open dialogue?
Yes, I think open dialogue is a fantastic development. It came along really towards the end of my time working in the system. The particular organization that I work for hasn't taken any notice of it, and I'm not in a position, I'm not actually working in the bit that has anything to do with psychosis, so I'm not in a position to influence that. But what I love about open dialogue is that it listens to everybody, and that is at the heart of it. Takes seriously what everybody says. That's at the heart of my approach. And something I haven't really come into, but which is important, and this is very important in the cross-cultural adaptation that I'm working on at the moment, the idea of bringing in the whole system, bringing in other people, that where somebody has got stuck managing themselves in a way that where they need to change, they need to manage their inner state differently, they need helpers around them. And it's actually much better to recruit your natural helpers than to be reliant on a whole load of health professionals. So certainly when I worked in the hospital, I would always, towards discharge, I would bring in the family and people who they had a spiky diagram, they would share it with their family and explain to their family what they needed to help them with. in cross-cultural working, very often people are much more family oriented. It's much more natural that the whole system has got to be signed up to something for anything to happen. The Western sort of treating people as lonely individuals, which I don't think works anyway, works, oh dear, sorry, even less. I forget to click this. So yes, I think open dialogue is fantastic, and it's taken hold in some places in our country, but not others. And I wish it to spread. Also, it is an alternative to traditional psychiatry, and I think you probably realised I am not a fantastic fan of traditional psychiatry.
Well, Stephen's asking, what do you see as the role of peer specialists, people with lived experience of mental health challenges and training and peer support?
Yeah.
What do you see as their role in
Absolutely.
people
Absolutely central.
Transliminal states? Yeah.
Absolutely central. It's interesting. I gave a talk to a bunch of researchers in a really high-powered research group in Glasgow recently. And I had a rather short time to give my talk. And the person who got it straight away was the peer specialist in the group. I hope it is the case that, and I think I said in my my introduction to mental health, I did a lot of voluntary work, and I was standing alongside people and understanding what they're going through, both what it's like to be at the receiving end of the mental health services, and also what's going on for them internally. That is my first port of call, and it is your peer specialist who can keep that real and who can, let's have many more in our services.
Yeah. Looks like Ilana is asking, could you talk about the mindfulness approach to working with psychosis? Had thought that could be more destabilizing.
Yes, it's very important how you do it. And there's mindfulness and mindfulness. The way I use mindfulness anyway is always very close to grounding in the present. I will always start off with, there's a nice phrase in ACT, somebody brought up ACT, get out of your head into your body. The idea of grounding yourself in present physical reality. Very often meeting a new person with psychosis in the hospital, it wasn't a very good idea to start talking about mindfulness, but I'd use things like being 100% in the present moment. Let's be really in this room together. The idea that what's tormenting you at the moment is stuff that's going on in your head. If you can get out of your head into your body, into the moment, then noticing breathing, noticing what it feels like, noticing what it feels like to have a body, noticing everything around, really being alive to it for the first time, really seeing things, noticing judgments, being aware that's how the mind works, and with amused tolerance, just letting go of those judgments. Boring, interesting, good, bad, and just coming back to being with what is here in the present. And then I've got a mindfulness of finding your strong center, taking your place here and now, feeling you've got a right to do that, feeling you're gathered together in one place. From that strong place, face the inner experiences, face the horrible voices, and that takes courage. Face the ideas that you hold firmly, but you're aware that other people question, like being God or something. It's not nice to have to think that maybe you've got that wrong, but maybe to go forwards, it's important to sit lightly to it. So that's the sort of way in which I use mindfulness. And I wouldn't leave people with their own process for any length of time. I think that's the way not to make it dangerous. It's a very led mindfulness.
Yeah. Now you mentioned like helping people feel more centered in their body, but
Yeah.
I heard, I guess I've more, I mean, some people are kind of like afraid of being in their body because they hold so much trauma in their body. Would you say anything about
Yes.
how to work
Yes.
with that?
Yes. I mean, being, I think I'm very aware um, that asking people to do this can be challenging. Very often I will have shared with people that states of mind diagram with the circle for the memory. We will have talked about trauma where that is something that's intruding into the present. And what I do is to help people to use mindfulness to sort out past from the present, to be aware of what is now and what was then, and again to use compassion for their past self, to bring up the compassion they would feel for, say, a child who went through that. Maybe they were blaming themselves, or maybe they have harsh feelings towards themselves, to get into that detached place where they can. I've got, again, in the Comprehend, Cope and Connect book, there is a section on reordering your relationship to the past using compassion and anger, using anger positively. So that might well need to be worked on first. Yes, I agree.
Um, yeah. For one thing, I want to encourage people to type in more questions. We have a little bit more time if you can think of questions you have. I know this has been great, so maybe everyone's just digesting what they've heard. One thing I guess I could ask about, like you haven't some ways of thinking, well, even psychosynthesis is one, but really talk a
Yeah.
lot about the parts of a person and how those
Yes.
come together, or something like internal
Yeah.
family systems. I don't know if you're familiar with that, which goes kind of along the
Yeah.
same lines, weaving parts together, or how to
Yeah.
interact
Yeah.
with parts. Do you want to say anything how your system conceptualizes that part of things?
Yes. Yeah. That's the orchestra conductor. Again, in the program in the book, there is one section which is about working with identifying and working using mindfulness to work with the different aspects of the self, with the idea that everybody has got these parts. I think I picked it up from originally, I guess, psychosynthesis via John Rowan, subpersonalities. I've always worked with subpersonalities, but I sort of put it in slightly more CBT type terms. But it is really the same work. And the important part of that is that each of them has both a positive and a negative aspect, so that the one that seems to be goody two shoes is, very conscientious, and everything is probably also getting too stressed up and too easily taken advantage of. The rebel or the self-destructive part is trying to keep the person safe. So being able to use mindfulness to be aware of which bit is in charge, what's going on there, in the same way as working out, using mindfulness to work out whether you're in shared or unshared reality, and being able to call on the bits that you need, the potential that you've got, being able to use untapped potential, develop untapped potential. I love that when towards the end of a therapy somebody is taken up dancing, or they've picked up something, that they'd abandoned earlier on in life. They've started to inhabit a part of themselves that was there, but which had got neglected or trampled on.
Right. Yeah. So one question is, could you talk about how to treat the paranoia, like the idea that one's being targeted?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, that will be, that is an experience of relationship. It's experience of threat, a threat relationship. And there I would, if the person, it's at all possible to get that two-way dialogue going with them, to get the collaborative relationship, where I could do a spiky diagram, and we would then track the way in which I would make an assumption. Anybody with paranoia, there have been threat times in the past when they have been realistically under threat. And we will track those and talk about how real and how important those are. We will use the states of mind diagram and the fact that when you're in a stressed up state, or when you're in a drifting state, there is no access to time, so that the past is experienced. And in particular, if you've gone into unshared reality, there is no time in unshared reality. So you're wide open to the past and things that have happened in the past. So it is no surprise that the whole world becomes populated with threat. And the propositional mind is always trying to play catch up, the reasonable mind. It's trying to make sense of things. I see it sort of running as fast as it can to try and, sort of, what in the hell's going on here? Picks up any odds and ends that happen to be lying around. It's the neighbour. They're piping gas into the cellar, or whatever it happens to be, So all this sort of strange ideas come along, and because there is a sense of magnified conviction in unshared reality, these become kind of locked in and vicious circles set up. And if the person can understand this and can understand how the past has taken over the present, then you can start using mindfulness really to disentangle that.
Colleen says, someone I'm about to start working with has a delusion that there are toxins in the environment that are contaminating the family members. How might you begin with someone with this fear?
Well, I would talk about realistic fears, because I'm sure there are toxins in the environment, but only up to a point. And again, I would say with shared reality, the whole idea of the shared and unshared reality is that we cannot have certainty. I think our environment, there's a lot about Southampton, the city where I live, is quite heavily polluted because partly because we have a lot of road traffic, like everyone does, and partly because we have huge cruise ships, and there's no way of regulating the way that they puff stuff out into the port area. So we have a real pollution problem, which does kill people. So you don't deny that, but there's something about scale, and there's something about getting a sense of perspective. And all you can do here, we cannot know absolutely most things, but if there is a general consensus that sort of it's roughly okay, and everybody thinks you're overreacting, and it's kind of messing up your life and stopping you from getting on with things, then it's a fair bet that unshared reality is taken over here. And unshared reality is so good at getting it wrong. So I'd draw out a vicious circle there to try and draw that one out.
Okay. And Lordy wonders if there's a kind of self-help program with this model of psychosis and says in my country, most people have the problem of not finding any psychotherapist for psychosis, except for the standard psychiatrist.
Well, I think the self-help program would be to have a look at my website, have a look at the program, the What is Real program is on there. Get hold of Madness, Mystery and the Survival of God. It's all in that, along with some other interesting things as well. Get hold of the Comprehend, Cope and Connect is less purely about psychosis. It's more, it's right across the board, but it does talk about psychosis. There's not much. I mean, it's only in pockets in England, and certainly the program hasn't penetrated yet. But if people want to get it going, then that's up to them. And things like, I don't know how your spiritual emergent, get involved with your local spiritual emergency network and turn it over to this sort of perspective. If you find that they're wasting their time trying to work out what's a spiritual experience, what's a spiritual emergency, and what's a psychosis.
Yeah, Patrick wonders, can you talk about voice dialogue, the process of bringing the voice into conversation to develop the relationship with the voice or with different selves?
Yes, I mean, voice dialogue is, sort of a two-chair way of managing that interrelationships. As I say, I can see one can have interrelationships between different aspects of the self, but one can have also interrelationship with the voices. And it'd be a therapeutic technique to bring that alive. I'm aware of it. I've read the research, which is incredibly encouraging. And, I know it's great stuff. It's not, I don't actually think I practice in a very gentle way. I'm probably, having worked in acute for a long time, I don't do anything terribly spectacular because people aren't usually in a great place. But I can imagine that, if somebody is strong enough for it, it could be fantastic.
Yeah. Allison's making the point that the, quote, canaries in the coal mine live in unshared reality.
Yeah.
Say anything about that.
I totally agree. Yeah, I am I'm very involved in the ecological movement, as you probably gathered from my concern about pollution. I think that the sensitive people, the people that are prepared to be open to what might be really going on out there, who have not closed themselves down, are vulnerable. That the danger is that because they feel all this very strongly, they feel the distortion in our relationship with the planet, with the non-human creatures, that sort of thing. It can, if it becomes unbearable, they will become addicts. They will use something or other to deaden it all, to run away, to turn, to find some way to switch it all off. We need to support the sensitive people, the people who are prepared to work to save the situation. Yeah.
Allison wonders, would you say these approaches are effective with bipolar disorder?
Yes. I'm blind to, I don't believe in diagnosis. People with bipolar disorder are people who temperamentally are people of vivid moods, and their moods are very often destabilized by either trauma or being very sensitive and therefore acutely sensitive to more, sort of the kind of knocks of everyday life, like being bullied and that other people sort of survive without problems that, push them into extremes, cycling between extreme states. But so-called bipolar disorder is just another way that people manage what it feels like to be them.
Yeah, this is great. Jen mentions that there's a Facebook group, Shades of Awakening, where people talk about some issues like this.
Yeah.
So people that are
Yeah.
here want to follow up, they can do that. I know we have
Yeah.
kind of gotten to the end of our time. Oh, Isabel, is it okay if we send out the PowerPoint to the people that attended and
Yes.
registered?
No, no, please do. Yes, yes.
Guys,
Happy,
ask for
happy to share stuff.
that.
I'm just sorry that I went and vanished in the middle of it, but
Or froze. But no, you were great. And your voice was very dynamic, so it carried a lot of life.
Well, thank you very much, everybody who attended. And, you can keep in touch. I've got a website with a contacts, sort of facility. And do read the books and do, contact me with questions about them or thoughts or anything you want. And do, get people in the States interested.